So, morning everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of the Recession Rebellion. Just a couple of reminders for housekeeping, just in case this is your first time, is keep your video off, keep your audio on mute. Feel free to ask questions throughout. So at the bottom of Zoom is the little chat button. You can just pop that, and then you can just select Martin Lucas with host in brackets, and then ask any questions as we go. We welcome that. We've got some cracking interactions and questions last week. Before we begin, do you want to just introduce yourself, Phil, say what you do?
So hello, I'm Phil. I run a business called Corporate Punk, and we're all about helping other businesses to become more resilient, responsive and innovative.
Nice one. My name is Martin Lucas. I run a business called Gap in the Matrix. My core focus is mathematical psychology, which is the thinking and numerical side of psychology. So we generally work on sales, service and marketing growth. And today is the day of Phil. Do you like that one? Is that good for ego, Phil? The Phil Day? And
Day of Phil.
Phil's going to be talking to us about remote working, how to manage teams in ways that are fast, not furious. So over to you, Phil.
So I was really conscious when I put this particular thing on the agenda. I was like, the world does not need any more content about remote working right now. I'm seeing a lot of stuff written on LinkedIn about it, a lot of stuff on Twitter, a lot of stuff in the press, I think understandably so. But I want to try and give a couple of new angles in on it this morning so that actually we aren't just, going over the same old ground. So, and particularly I think there's an opportunity in remote working that is being missed in a lot of the commentary, and I want to focus down on that this morning with a view to trying to give us all a real challenge to think about as we go forward into the week ahead. What's going on though, first and foremost, remote working has now been thrust on most of us. So I was talking to our accountants the other day who said we've spent 3 years trying to get people working remotely, working from home, that sort of thing, and we've managed to do it now in 3 days. So we're not going to fully revert. I was sat in board meetings last week, and if I was in real estate, commercial real estate, I would be deeply, deeply concerned at the moment, because in both board meetings I was sat in last week, we were having conversations about how we can massively reduce overheads simply by encouraging more home working going forward. So taking footprints of offices down by half to allow people to get together, but allow a much more flexible and iterative form of work. It feels very likely at this point that we're not going to fully revert to how we worked previously. Organisations are adapting and responding quickly, but I think are actually ignoring a lot of cultural implications. The crucial thing to bear in mind about remote working is that really it's not in-person working without Zoom. We all kind of know that. Martin and I, before we started this webinar today, we're talking about the fact that, you miss body language, you miss that energetic connection with others, and we have to find new ways to kind of compensate for that. But actually, even from things like working cadences and so forth, it's not the same as, not the same as being there face to face. I find in our own practice that what we used to do, which is half day or day long interventions with clients, we simply can't do when we're working remotely. So it changes all that kind of, how we actually need to interact sort of stuff as well. So out of that, it's not in-person working without Zoom. There are cultural and operational realities that actually need some fairly deep consideration. I'm going to talk to you about a few of those. But I think there's opportunities in remote working, actually, not only to improve our well-being, but also actually thinking about the quality of planning and execution of our businesses and lives. And it's really that quality of planning and execution thing I want to spend the most time on in the time we've got together this morning. But I think the crucial thing to bear in mind is that it's kind of here now. We're not going to go back to it. And actually, it's more of a sea change or a step change than we actually might think it is at first glance. So if you're going to talk about remote working, let's get the basics out of the way first of all. We talk about the 4 C's of remote working at Corporate Punk. So these are the things that we really do need to be thinking about. These are the basics, right? So I'm going to absolutely flip by them this morning. The first is contextual clarity, so ensuring everybody understands what's happening and why. If you've heard me speak before, you'll hear me say, in the absence of communication, people will believe the worst or the weirdest thing. So we're all meaning-making machines as human beings. We all start to fill vacuums with narratives. So if we're not talking to people, actually what happens is they're going to be making their own stuff up, particularly when they're not together. So the key thing for leaders when moving to remote work is we have to over-communicate in the short term. More stand-ups, more huddles, more all-team meetings. And not just always face-to-face either. Things like email can be really useful to us there, and even WhatsApp. Companionship is different. So companionship is about actually quitting everything needing to be about business. We need companionship every day in every office around the country. There's so many acts of companionship that take place, from making tea for each other, to chatting about the weekend, to having a bit of a laugh about whatever. So there's this mode of communication needed in remote working, which is easy to overlook, which is what are you doing around companionship? What are you doing to foster that sense of community, if you will, when you take away the business? And that's different from contextual clarity. So contextual clarity is about, I'm communicating what's happening around the business. Companionship is about going, actually, away from the business, we still need to find opportunities to chat and connect. The third thing is conflict management. So actually making sure that conflict is inevitable in business. It's like politics, right? You don't have a choice about whether or not you have politics. You have a choice about how healthy or unhealthy they are. So conflicts are always going to arise. And we always teach in corporate punk that, conflict, again, is a healthy thing in business if it can be resolved quickly and if it can be resolved well. The journey of doing anything creative or innovative is the journey of getting into conflict with others. The problem that remote working brings to the fore about conflict is the fact that it can be harder to get into conflict, into healthy conflict, when you're not in the same room as people. That energetic connection can be missing. That ability to kind of collaborate as well can be missing. And also, a lot of the time, we're actually just not together. So, that sense of isolation, again, bringing it together with a contextual clarity point, people can start making meaning up for themselves, and actually can start feeling conflicted with others, when actually those things could be easily resolvable. So conflict management is not really talked about in remote working a lot, but should be. You need to actively consider how you'll manage it and potentially think about contracting with your teams around it. The final thing is connection. So connection is about balance. I was talking before this webinar started about some of the challenges that working parents have got at the moment. Balance is about, how do you preserve a sense of life outside of work? How do you balance out those requirements to, at the moment, homeschool, exercise, do all those things, with the requirement to kind of keep the lights on and keep working? So an active conversation about what balance means is so important in remote working. And it's about on versus off times. So how are we making sure we're very clear on when we're on and when we're off? Now, if we think about when we're on and when we're off, it actually gives us a much deeper sense of what the opportunity in remote working actually is. And this is where I want to spend the majority of the time that we've got together today. So think about on versus off, and think about the opportunity that on versus off presents for us. And let's get into it. So in a book called Deep Work, Cal Newport talks about the fact that there are fundamentally two types of work. There is shallow work, which is to say, answering emails or having a chat with your colleagues, or maybe a status meeting, for example, or maybe a call with a client. And then there is deep work, which is actually the process of creative thinking. It's the process of innovation. It's the process of strategic planning, of having deeper, more meaningful interactions with others and time to ourselves to think about what we're really doing. In my view, remote work presents a considerable opportunity for all of us to embrace more deep work than we've ever had in the past. Now that matters because, if you read the book, Cal Newport talks a lot about actually how it's deep work, that kind of work that's spent on innovation, on creativity, which is essential to being able to create and sustain competitive advantage. I also personally believe it's critical to us feeling like we're actually having a satisfying work life. Personally, if I'm not feeling like I'm being creative, I'm giving deep thought to what I'm doing, I don't feel like I'm moving forward. A lot of the work I do personally, particularly around writing, is classic deep work. I need to be able to think about it as I'm doing it. So the real opportunity for remote working, I believe, is to spend more time on deep work and less time on shallow work. That requires us to get a number of things right. It requires us to think very actively about how we plan our time and our schedule. It requires us to work with our colleagues to think about how they're planning their time and their schedule as well. And we also need appropriate tools and resources. There is no point, if you are going to want to focus on deep work, in just piling on platform after platform after platform, that you're spending your life moving between Notion and Airtable and WhatsApp and Zoom and all these other apparently labour-saving technologies, all they are in the context of deep work potentially is more and more and more distraction. What we need in deep work is to be able to switch the world off from around us, rather than having to actively and deeply engage with it in a kind of shallow sense. So that's the foundation. Get your time and schedule sorted, get your colleagues' time and schedule sorted, and then get your tools and resources working for you, not working as a distraction. When you've done that, here are some good deep work questions you might want to start thinking through. The first one kind of comes from something that I was talking with someone about last week, which was a deep sense of, it was giving rise to a deep sense of frustration in me. People are already talking about being bored with being at home. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very sympathetic to the fact that being at home all the time is not good for us as human beings, and that there are different ways that we need to try and compensate for that. But I was kind of going, if you don't recognise the opportunity to take a step back and to have a really good think through your life and your business in this context, what a wasted opportunity that will be. So the first question, what will I or we be when all of this is over, and why? That's a really classic kind of deep work question. It requires deep thinking and deep reflection. You might want to deeply consider your why. So thinking about your purpose in life. What's the role that your business plays in the lives of its customers? What goals are you setting? You might want to take time out to map multiple potential futures. So to think about, actually, we could go down route 1, route 2, route 3, what would that mean? Or you might imagine your future zero-based budget style. So zero-based budgeting, of course, sets the idea that not a single penny of spend is laid in stone. So we actually have to start by justifying every single penny that we're going to spend every single year before it gets spent. That's the idea of zero-based budgeting. Could you imagine your future that way? If you didn't have all of the things that to do now that you did, if you didn't have the business that you had, if you weren't working in what you were working, what would your future be? And how do you remain open to all of that? Moving on, the second classic deep work question, what do I and we need to do now in order to make that happen? So, I'm doing some deep work at the moment around the future of corporate punk. What do I want it to be when this is all over? And why is that? And what is it we need to do now in order to make that happen? How do we experiment rather than overcommit? So, for example, rather than going, I've had a brilliant idea, this idea is the future. How do we make sure that we're laying sensible bets about what that could be, with clear KPIs underpinning them to build a really good quality learning capability within the business? If you're going to do this kind of planning, you want to keep it to just you or keep it to 2 pizza teams. That's from Jeff Bezos. He says, even now in Amazon, if you can't feed a team on 2 pizzas, the team is too big. And critically, stay quiet until the path is proven. So what that means is resist the temptation to commit publicly to what it is you're planning to do as well, which for those of us who are excitable entrepreneurs who like to get out there into the world and just start making things happen, if we're not careful, what we end up doing is putting very mixed messages out. So what will I be when all this is over, and why? What do I need to do now to make this happen? And how will my working life be better as a result? Wind out 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. Write and draw the future that you're thinking about, and commit to what needs to be different now and do it. And also remind yourself, as I always say to people, you can get very heavy with these questions sometimes. We can all get a bit subsumed. Deep work's really helpful. Deep is really good, by the way. You do need shallow as well. So know that none of this matters compared to the universe. What I really mean by that is, to be honest, we are just here spinning around on a rock in infinite space. And we need to keep all of these questions in perspective as well. So in terms of remote working, just to recap all we've got to this morning, I think the critical things to bear in mind are, firstly, get those 4 C's right. Be clear on context. Make sure you make time for companionship. Contract with your people around how you're going to manage conflict, and be really clear on connection requirements. When are you on, when are you off, and how are you going to achieve balance? Beyond that, really give deep thought to deep work. So how is it that you're going to use this opportunity for remote working? The time given to you by commute, the fact that we don't have to spend quite as much time in meetings and things like that. How are we going to carve out time properly to do deeper thinking about who we are and what we want to be in the world? Make sure that you carve out the time to do that, and you get the tools and resources in the right place. And then in the end, you've got 3 questions that you might just want to start thinking about. Who will I be when all this is over, and why? What do I need to do now to make it happen? and how will my working life be better as a result? And if you can spend time dwelling on questions like that, or those questions, or questions like that, then actually you will come out of this period of enforced isolation stronger. You will come out of it with a greater sense of momentum, a greater sense of optimism, and a greater sense of commitment to what the future needs to look like. And for me, that is actually the real promise of remote working, is more time to spend doing the things that really count. And that's all I wanted to talk about this morning. Any questions?
That was brilliant, Phil. Just absolutely brilliant. So let's kickstart. I have an absolutely brilliant question from David, right? So what deep work implications do you think there are in this situation for introverts compared to extroverts? I'm watching extroverts really struggle, while it's very empowering by comparison for those who take their energy from themselves, which is the introverts. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, if I've understood that question correctly, how are we, yes, extroverts are finding this time really a lot more challenging because they prefer to be with others. And actually for a lot of extroverts, particularly extroverts who are more extreme extroverts, of course, then they can struggle with things like reflection, taking time out to pause. Whereas some of the questions that I've just posed today, introverts will naturally gravitate towards. I would say to you that for the extroverts among us, deep work doesn't need to be done on your own. It can still be done with other people. You don't always have to take time out to ruminate. There's different exercises that you can get into together that we can talk about if it's helpful. Different exercises and getting together to encourage that kind of reflection. Deep work can also be playful. It doesn't need to be really serious and somber and dark, And so I think if you get the exercises and the techniques right, you get the mood right, and you remove the need to do it on your own right, then actually extroverts can really engage with this kind of process and this kind of thinking as well. But no, I do understand that. I'm sympathetic. It can be a challenge at the same time.
Cool. Question from Dominic. So what insights from deep work have you had personally, Phil, about your business so far?
Well, as I said in my answer, stay quiet until the path is proven. Right. So I have had some, but I'm not necessarily going to be sharing them at the moment. I think the thing I would say is that, which I will talk about, is the fact that within corporate punk, we've always had this belief in the importance of the values that we set out for the business. And I talk a lot about values, and I wrote a piece on it actually in Forbes that went out this morning. But really connecting back to values and making sure that how we're showing up in the world has got integrity, and that we're here to be helpful, and we're here to meet people where they're at. And I think sometimes you're racing around town, you've got the cut and thrust of business going on, and we've got clients over here and targets over there and whatever else. It becomes really easy just to lose sight of those guiding principles and those values. I don't think we've ever truly lost sight of them, but one of the things that's happened for me as a result of all this is I've got really deeply connected back to what those are, and I'm using them a lot now to both influence how we're doing initiatives like this actually, which is one out working up our values, but also how we're thinking about the future.
So I can tell you right now, for the same reasons for me, your insights about the deep work versus the shallow work has really caught on with the audience, and I find it super enthralling as well. So we've got another question that sits around that, and another great question. This one comes from Heather. So deep thinking often requires tapping into our subconscious memory and experiences rather than just our surface analytical brain. Do you have tips for how to access that, or different ways that you've done that for yourself?
I think it depends on what kind of thinker you are. So for me, the kind of I'm quite wordy, as you'll know if you've ever read any of my columns. So for me, a lot of mind mapping stuff is quite useful. So just to sit and free associate words, that kind of thing. I'm just seeing if I've got something here. I haven't. There we go, stepping away from the computer amateurishly there. But the other thing that we found really helpful with clients is actually just getting, I'll circulate this to people, I'll try and remember what they're called, but just getting cards that have got images on them. So, we have decks of cards cards that we use at work that are just literally just different sorts of images, and actually using that as a way to getting into feelings about different things, or again just starting to free associate between different courses of action, or just an opportunity to kind of go, how do I want things to feel, but look at that visually, if you will, rather than having to always explain it with words. Those sorts of techniques we found to be very, very useful. So sometimes just removing the burden of language actually can be really helpful in that context.
Cool. This one's a two-part question from Richard. So does Phil have any tips to increase accountability and productivity between remote teams? And as an example, business leaders sharing the responsibility for those things. So it's a question that Rich is posing to do with trust between the teams, efficiency, productivity, and just good leadership, I think.
Okay, well, let me say one thing to start off with. In fact, let me say, before I get into that, these are the cards at my best. These are great, right? You can buy them for about 30 quid on Amazon, and they're just really, really good. They've got loads of images on them that can really help with like free association exercises. In terms of accountability, you do not have an accountability problem that is driven by remote working. You have an accountability problem, full stop, in your business. So if people are not accountable, if people are not able to deliver the results, if we don't feel our people are trustworthy, then that is a business-wide cultural issue rather than anything to do with remote working at all. All that remote working is doing is it's just shining a light on it. And I think the reason I say that is because there is a danger sometimes of people thinking that actually the working mode is the problem. It's not. You've got a more fundamental problem in your culture. If that's the case, the one thing that needs to happen is, or the most important thing that can happen, I believe, is to try and shift the dynamic away from presenteeism and productivity in a classic hours and minutes sense, if you will, to results-based reporting. So and I would put rhythms in place to be able to do that. So for example, if I wanted accountability in a team, I'm not really bothered how you get there, I'm bothered when you get there and the fact you get there. So I would be saying on a Monday, these are the things we're going to deliver on a Friday. Everybody's going to come around and share their outputs on the Friday. We're going to talk about the results we got. We're going to talk about what worked well and what didn't. And a bit of social pressure as well in that context, don't forget. But for me, it's all about that. It's all about how do we get how do we shift the focus to results? How do we put clear reporting rhythms around those results? And how do we put visibility around when those results are being delivered and when those results aren't?
Brilliant. Fantastic, Phil. So that's it for questions for today. I know that tomorrow we have Claire Croft joining us, and she's going to be talking about the self-leader having the confidence to lead from within. Do you want to just give us a little rundown of Claire and her background?
That is going to be amazing. So Claire is my sort of partner in crime at Corporate Punk. We've worked together for years. She's put together an amazing session tomorrow morning on how to self-lead through times of crisis and change. And it's going to be it's going to be quite a deep session, I think, even if it's a short one, but it's going to be full of lots of interesting provocations and as always, practical advice and things to take away.
Brilliant. So we're back to 9 o'clock tomorrow morning for everybody. And as you can see on the slide there, we're offering complimentary problem solving sessions. We've got the first one of these booked in towards the end of next week, and complimentary does mean complimentary. So if you want to further explore the subjects we've been talking about, just let us know. But otherwise, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and thanks for your time today.
Have a good day, everyone.